Yay, welcome, welcome back. So happy to introduce you to my very dear friend, Dearbhla. And how long have you been teaching yoga?
14 years.
Yeah, so we kind of like came up the same way together, and she'll give you a little bit of her history and her story, which is really fascinating. Beautiful Irish sister here, priestess. And I mentioned to you that her husband Dave Stringer is going to be here next week, which will be awesome. So you get both the Shiva Shakti of their powerhouse. Good. Yeah. So I'll just hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to have you here.
Well, honored to be here. It's always an absolute honor and a joy to be associated with anything that Ashley Powerhouse Turner is doing. And I know that she always attracts really powerful and powerful seekers. So I'm really grateful to be here with all of you, because I can, as soon as I walked into the room, I could feel that pulsation of the energy in the room from all of your collective vibration and that Shakti of what's happening in this space. So it's always really an honor to step into that and to be included. So thank you all. And I'll just share a very little bit about myself and then get on to what we're getting on to. So as Ashley said, my name is Dearbhla and I'm Irish. I'm from Dublin, and I moved to the States 16 years ago to get a PhD in philosophy. I was going to graduate school in Chicago, getting a PhD in analytic philosophy, which is quite different from the arena that most of us are kind of at home in now in the yoga world. And Ashley and I share that commonality in that we both have this pretty analytic training. As you all know, Ashley comes from depth psychology. And so we both marry academia with yoga, and we've both, I suppose you'd say, taken a kind of a, taken the bull by the horn, so to speak, and created our own niche, our paradigm, if you will. Because, well, I'll speak for myself, analytic philosophy is super rigorous, right? Like the idea that you would sit around and talk about Shakti, or God, or chakras. I mean, you might do that over coffee in the lounge, and even still you'd be pretty tentative about doing that. Just those words have no currency in the paradigm. Do you know what I mean by that? They're just, it's not part of that paradigm, which is a beautiful paradigm. And I think analyticity and philosophy are very useful ways of being. They train you to think, to have discernment, which is a very important skill for everything we're doing, right? It's an important life skill. Anyway, at the time that I was doing the PhD, I also was like really amping up my yoga practice, basically to cope with being in a PhD program. Anyone here been in a PhD program or been in one? Yeah, I mean, you never know. I could be talking to a bunch of doctors of chemistry or something. You just never know. It's very stressful. It's really beautiful, but it's a lot. So anyway, there I am, amping up my yoga practice, and then I started chanting kirtan, which had nothing to do with my relationship with Dave Stringer, came later. They were not connected. And then I just started like getting really into the bhav. Have you been talking about bhav?
A little bit.
You will next week. When Govindas is here, you'll just be swimming in the bhav. But it's just like the emotional energy of chanting and yoga and all that stuff, like that's more esoteric, and I do not mean that in a pejorative sense at all. But basically my worldview shattered, and I was no longer able to contain the two parts of my life. Continuing in a PhD in analytic philosophy, super rigorous, super cerebrally intense, and on the other hand being like, yay, Hare Krishna, Jai Ram. They just weren't, they weren't coming together at all. And maybe had I been more mature, I could have just ridden it out, but I chose to leave the PhD program with the tearful blessing of my academic advisor at the time, who himself is a very spiritual Orthodox Jew, but really like juicy in his practice. And I remember sitting in his office crying, realizing I was going to leave the PhD program, which was a very difficult thing to do. And then I was teaching yoga full-time, which was not what I expected at all. Are most of you teaching yoga full-time? Yeah, I don't know how it was or is for you, but I found this massive, going from being in a PhD program, which is kind of a rarefied environment. I mean, imagine like just being in a training like this all the time. You're super alive, you're super turned on, the conversations are amazing. And it's kind of like that also in a PhD. And then I found that teaching yoga full-time wasn't fulfilling me. It just left this massive crater in my life. So gradually I started to get more and more into yoga philosophy, neuroscience, seeing how could I bring that part of myself that was so alive when I was in the PhD program, because I'm sure you've heard Ashley say, your life is your curriculum. And as a teacher, you're teaching from your own life experience, and really it's disingenuous for us to do anything other than that, because the best gift that we can give our students is who we are. It took me a long time to figure that out, despite the fact that other people used to say to me, but the thing that's so distinctive about you is you're a philosopher, and that's what's great, it differentiates you from any other yoga teacher. And you know, I couldn't hear it for a long time, until eventually it's like that thing, you travel all over the world with your backpack, and everywhere you go, there you are, and eventually, you know, you come home and you're like, well, I get it, okay. I'm still me, I was me everywhere I went, and I'm gonna continue being me, so embracing that. So that's one thing that I also really wanted to touch in on, and I know Ashley deals with this really beautifully in her trainings, about the gift that you are to your students, and really embracing who you are. So, so that's how I got to be where I am, teaching things like neuroscience and yoga philosophy. It was really me integrating more deeply my own self, my own head and heart. So enough about me. And you guys all have the handout. It's I want to direct.
In the very back, the very last part of the manual that you just got, the last few pages are hers, and then you just got a few more from John. I think that's enough.
Okay, it looks like the first page is a diagram of the brain. Oh. So we'll just look at that later, if at all. It's really for your own edification. But I want you to look at the page that says handout number 2, and on it is a chant, Asatoma. So we're going to take about 3-4 minutes to chant this. Are you guys into chanting? Yeah, and if you're not, you will be next week. But you guys have been chanting in the mornings here, right? Yeah, beautiful. So, did everybody find it? Well, I'm not sure how your handout is set up in your folder, so.
Page 74.
Yeah, you have a different numeric system than I do. But it'd be good to have your handout.
It does say handout number 2. It says science, samskaras, and self-mastery.
Yeah, and it'd be good to have just have your handout ready. I would even separate it from the rest of your folder, so because we are going to be looking at it when I get into some of the technical jargon around neuroscience and that kind of stuff.
I think what would be helpful is that it's page 74 in the actual manual, not in what you just got handed out. Yeah. Oh.
Does everybody have it? Yeah. Okay. So Asatoma is a very ancient Vedic chant. I'm going to attempt to lead us in it. I am not my husband, and no, I'm not in his band. Very often when people they're like, hey, you know, and this is my wife, Dearbhla. Oh, great. Are you in Dave's band? No, I'm not. They never say, like, do you ever notice they never say to, like, the dude, oh, you know, this is my husband, Dave, he happens to be, oh, great, do you assist Dearbhla when she's teaching yoga classes? Right? Like, somehow that thing never quite goes the opposite way, right? But we'll do our best. So we're just going to do it in a without an instrument, just to tune in. And if you're not familiar with this chant, I'll read through it once. Asatoma satgamaya, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, mithyorma amritam gamaya. Lead me from the unreal to the real, lead me from the darkness to the light, lead me from the temporary to the eternal. So a very beautiful invocation and request, I guess, to the universe. So please just bring your hands down onto your thighs and close your eyes for a moment. And just drop in to your body. Start to feel your breath. And just noticing the sounds in the room, sensations in your body. And start to take a few deep breaths. And then bring your hands together at your heart. Let's chant the sound of Om 3 times. Take a deep inhale. Asatoma satgamaya tamasoma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. 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 Okay, when you're ready, opening your eyes. So, you will notice on your handout that I call this module Science, Samskaras and Self-Mastery, and I want to talk about why that is. So as I've come to understand it, I guess, we could spend the rest of the day talking about yoga and not tire of the conversation and what yoga is, right? But I've come to believe that yoga is a tool for self-inquiry, self-knowledge, self-actualization, for growth, for self-mastery, very importantly, and for creating a life of flourishing and thriving, right? Yoga is to help you flourish. It's not to insist that you're vegetarian or vegan or that, you know, you can put your foot behind your head, or that you can sing in a perfect C, or whatever that thing is. It's to make your life flourish the best that it can. And yoga provides us with time-tested techniques to increase the flourishing in our lives, to help us thrive better, right? Unfortunately, it turns out that we actually have to do the practice, right? So sustained practice over time is the key to the effectiveness of yoga tools. And you guys all know this, right? You're all practicing and teaching yoga. But I would also add to that that it's a mechanism for creating spiritual, psychic, and emotional well-being. And I know Ashley talks a lot about all of those elements. Increased connection, and also freedom and resilience. So these are all really important things in self-mastery. And I don't know about you all, but one thing I discovered fairly quickly in my yoga practice was that I really didn't have a lot of self-mastery. I thought I did. Well, in fact, I didn't even understand the degree to which I did not until I started to understand more about what self-mastery is. Equanimity, resilience, poise. And I don't mean those in a sense to sound judgmental about any time any of us is not 100% poised, because we all get to be human, right? But in that deep-seated way that we're able to choose responsiveness over reactivity to make our lives go better. And for each one of us, I think it's true that when our lives are going better, the lives of the people around us are going better, right? When you suffer less, everyone else suffers less. So, tools and techniques to increase well-being and flourishing and diminish suffering. And we'll talk about a few of Patanjali's sutras today. And are you guys familiar with Patanjali? Anybody in here a total Patanjali expert? Okay, thank God. I'm not either. but I think that Patanjali was a great psychologist. I think at the time what he was doing was probably very cutting edge in terms of his insights into the workings of our psychology. I think a lot of the translations of the Yoga Sutras are completely impenetrable. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of them, like, even though, you know, I'm a native English speaker and I'm fairly cerebral, I pick them up and I'm just like, but I have found two that I really like. One is called The Secret of the Yoga Sutra. You do have a reading list as part of your handout, I believe. Yeah, and it's on there. It's Pandit Tigu, I can never pronounce his name. Tigunate. Pandit Rajmani Tigunate, and he's the head of the Himalayan Institute, which is the Sri Vidya lineage. That's a really beautiful translation of, do you know it? It's a beautiful translation of the sutras, very accessible, very easy to read English. And then there's another beautiful one by Nishkala Joy Devi, which you guys might have heard. It's also beautiful. But one thing that I really love about this Pandit Tigunate one is that he really talks about that, about the Yoga Sutras also as providing us with a roadmap for excellence in our lives, which I take it to be another way of talking about flourishing or thriving. So all that is to circle back to self-mastery and yoga being a modus for generating more self-mastery in our lives. And then I found this, I wanted to read this to you guys. I found this beautiful quote in the Bhagavad-Gita. Anyone in here a Bhagavad-Gita expert? It's a lot, yeah. I'm not either. And are you a Bhagavad-Gita expert? Okay. I found a beautiful translation of the Bhagavad-Gita by Stephen Mitchell. Do you guys have that one? It's really beautiful and it's also accessible. Because a lot of these translations of the Indian books, when they're done particularly by Indian scholars, the way of writing is very formal. So it can be very, very difficult to get the English. But this one is also Stephen Mitchell, very, very accessible. So the quote says, "The self is a friend for him who masters himself by the self. But for him who is not self-mastered, the self is the cruelest foe." Yeah. as you've probably all learned to your own you know, heartache, right? For all of us, our own selves, it turns out the self is the final frontier, right? In other words, that self-mastery is really one of the most, I believe, it's the most important thing we can do in our lives. So, how does that then tie in with science and samskaras? Well, you guys, we're going to talk about this in more detail, but everybody's familiar with the word samskara, yeah? Yeah. Okay, so samskaras are habitual ways of behaving, usually translated like that, or habitual ways of being. We can also say that they're neural pathways. They're grooves in our, you could say psychic grooves if you like, or mental grooves. We're going to talk about them a bit more scientifically in a little while. But so if you think about your habitual responses and your habitual ways of behaving, and think about self-mastery and suffering, and think about how all of those feed into each other, right? I don't know about you all, but I know that the biggest source of suffering in my life is my own habits and my inability to best my own habits. It comes right back to that quote from the Bhagavad-Gita. But for him who is not self-mastered, the self is the cruelest foe, right? So really important for us to get a hold of our own inner map. Inner map is the wrong way to say it. To gain sovereignty over our own inner domain is another way of talking about what yoga is, right? You guys all know you wouldn't be in this training if you were just thinking that yoga was doing 80 Surya Namaskar B, right, with a bunch of standing pose in it, right? I teach a lot of level 2, 3 yoga. Anybody here a Yoga Works teacher or student? Are you Yoga Works teacher? Okay. I teach for Yoga Works and I love them, and there's so much that's great about that company and about all of it, the students, the teachers, but I teach a lot of level 2, 3 classes at Yoga Works, and I can tell you that there are a lot of people in level 2, 3 yoga classes who seem to think that yoga is holding chaturanga for half a minute or just doing 70 chaturanga exhales. The attachment, I don't know what you think, Ashley, but in the 11 years I've lived in Los Angeles, watching the yoga culture change, becoming more and more obsessed with the physical, it's really fascinating. It's like there's no enlightenment in your next like fancy arm balance, and I love fancy arm balances and I love teaching them, but it's not where the roadmap is ultimately taking us. And so yeah, but you all know that because you're in this program, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't, in other words, have that yearning to go deeper. So, and science, well, it turns out that science now, as you all know, is enhancing our understanding of the efficacy of yoga techniques. In other words, helping us understand more why yoga is so useful. And it's also giving us a lot of insight into the benefits of meditation, of pranayama. Studies are being done about the benefits of yoga in prisons, with homeless populations, with veterans. There's a lot of scientific analysis happening now. And have you talked to them a lot about the scientific research on meditation? Not yet. But I know that's a particular area that you're really interested in. So Ashley will be laying lots of interesting facts on you guys about that. But so it's really a juicy area right now. And neuroscience, as I'm sure you guys, anyone who's alive at the moment, is like they're even talking about, you know, like the neuroscience of aesthetics, the neuroscience of, like, it's just really hot and sexy at the moment. But it turns out also that neuroscience gives us great insight into the workings of the mind and our physiology, and, well, actually, let's leave it there for a moment, and how the brain interacts with the rest of the body, very importantly. And we've been able to get a lot of insight into how the brain acts as an intermediary between the external environment and our inner environment, and how that actually really affects our own experience of our subjectivity at any time. Does that make sense? Okay, one thing I want to add as well is that if I get too heady or go off on a tangent, please feel free to raise a hand and ask a question or make a point. I really love questions, and I think contribution is very valuable, so I want to really emphasize that everybody's voice is welcome in that regard. Okay, so I want to circle back now for a moment to talking about self-mastery and meditation. So everybody here has a meditation practice, obviously, or you wouldn't be in this training. Do you guys know who Richard Miller is? Have you heard of him? It's not a test. It's just... So he's a really wonderful meditation teacher, and he's my teacher for a particular modality of Yoga Nidra. You guys all know what Yoga Nidra is, right? And Richard has developed a protocol called iRest, which is short for Integrative Restoration. And what he's done, he has a PhD in psychology, and what he's done is that he's, after decades really of studying the different traditional yoga nidras, he's created a protocol that's a little bit more secular and more geared towards the Western ear, if you will. And he's systematized this method, or this practice, and he's now been very successful in getting it out there. The US military is using iRest a lot. Yeah?
So I've done a yoga nidra class before, but I actually still can't define it very well if someone asks me what it is. Could you explain in your work with Richard Miller, like how would you define yoga nidra as a meditation?
Yeah, I'll tell you in my own words, and then I actually have some points written down what Richard says meditation is. But let me just continue with it. So his protocol is being used by the military now. And if you are interested in that, you can email me and I'll direct you to, I can give you a lot of resources if you happen to be somebody who loves to geek out on statistics and resources. But the protocol is being used with great success with veterans with PTSD. It turns out that it's highly, highly effective for, which of course is fantastic. And but you guys all know how much yoga is being used with veterans now anyway, I'm sure. But so as I understand it, Yoga Nidra is the experience of experiencing is a chance for a practice where you get to experience yourself as integrated, full presence and awareness. And it translates as the sleep of the yogi, but they actually say that a yogi is one who's never asleep, so sleep is a little bit misleading in that regard. But in the practice, when you're guided through the practice, the idea is that you do not fall asleep. And they say even if you do, that actually it's okay, because there's a part of you that's always listening and that absorbs the guidance and the teachings. And when you experientially, who here has done a Yoga Nidra? Okay. If we have time today, I'll take you guys through a short one. Let's see how we go. My two teachers are Richard Miller, Rod Stryker. Do you guys know who Rod is? And I'm sure Ashley has been talking to you about Rod as well. But Richard is really he's the one I've studied with and taken his training and that, so I'll speak more fully about that. The experience you have is basically you get really comfortable, you lie down, or you could be seated, super comfy, and at the beginning of the practice, the teacher, the person who's taking you through the practice does invite you to make an affirmation that you'll stay awake. And then you're basically guided through an experience of experiencing yourself from the outermost layer, which, do you guys know what the koshas are? Yeah. So from the body of sensation, feelings of warmth on your skin, coldness, a scratch on your eyebrow, that kind of stuff, to the breath, to the increasingly subtle. And what Richard has created with this iRest protocol, which is so important is that you get to experience the Vijnana Maya Kosha, which is concepts and beliefs, right? So you get to, over time, it wouldn't happen your very first session, to disassociate from beliefs that you hold about yourself and others and concepts that you hold. And for most of us, I think it's true to say, if not for all of us, that our beliefs that we hold about ourselves can be limiting, injurious, can reinforce trauma, for example, with the case of veterans. So what we're doing in a yoga nidra practice is dissolving samskaras. And we get to generate new, to dissolve them so that they dissipate and then generate new samskaras. I don't want to spend too long talking about it because we have quite a bit to get through, but if you are interested, I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one about it, or email, or, you know, we can talk more about it. Really, really beautiful practice, very, very effective. And just as a side note, the reason that it's so effective with the military, according to Richard Miller, is that for a lot of these vets, they've seen things that they can't talk about. They've seen their best friend get their head blown off, or a limb blown off, or they themselves have done things that they can't talk about, that they can't talk to anybody, maybe another veteran, but maybe not even that. So they get to, over time, in a safe space, and that you keep grounding into the body, which as yogis, everybody here does the physical practice of yoga, right? So as yogis, you know how important that is for grounding and centering, so that they get to dissolve the residue and the somatic residue of trauma. And that's really an invaluable gift for them. And we'll circle back a little bit around to this, a little bit later. So then meditation, Richard Miller talks about meditation like this. He says it's a path of devotion wherein we embody our interconnection with the entire cosmos and with ourselves. In meditation, we acknowledge and welcome the role of the body, mind, and 5 senses and their creation of a sense of separation, which in fact there is no separation. So it's a non-dual practice. I know it's freezing in here.
We don't have access to the air, so we're trying to work on that.
Yeah. In this practice, we're welcoming all perceptions, sensations, feelings, cognitions, and emotions as messengers sent from beyond. Very important point for those of us who are dealing with our own reactivity, which I take it to be pretty much everybody on the planet, right? As a reminder that they're messengers, not things that... Actually, let me stop there and come back to that point in a second. In meditation, we get to welcome our underlying wholeness. And also we get to activate the 7th sense that knows no separation. And a beautiful thing about chanting and kirtan, and even, I don't know if you guys felt it, but we chanted Asatoma 9 times there. But even after 9 rounds of chanting that, did you feel the energy in the room shifted? It just creates a unified field. And Dave, I'm guessing, even though we haven't discussed, but I know him well enough to know that he'll probably talk about this next week. And when you, resonance. And when you start to chant, I'm sure you've been experiencing this with Ashley in the mornings as well, it just drops you into a resonant field. And that's exactly this 7th sense that knows no separation, or this field that is really our birthright to kind of live here. Does that make sense? Okay. So also meditation, crucial tool for fostering equanimity, being at home in the body. I don't know about you guys, but it took me a few years of practicing asana. You know, I always had a meditation practice, but I wasn't super committed to it. But after, you know, like 5 years of practicing asana, where you're like, okay, Dearbhla, you could stand to do a bit more meditation now, it has delivered me home to myself in a deeper way. Home into that. Yeah, could I, are there any extra blankets? Could I get an extra blanket? I'm going to put it, yeah, that's grand. Thank you. So meditation is also really important tool for cultivating resilience, right? A really important part of self-mastery and flourishing, and for bringing about the parasympathetic response in the autonomic nervous system. Have you guys talked about that? Okay, yeah, so we'll be talking about it more, and there's stuff in your handout on this. And, okay, cool. So any questions so far, or points anybody wants to raise?
Would you mind reading that whole quote again straight through so we get that?
Which?
Or were those bullet points?
They were bullet points. Oh, right. Yeah, the Richard Miller one, yeah, they were bullet points. So, but also coming back to science, you know, some people, I take it none of you are, you wouldn't be in this particular program if you were, but there is a lot of resistance to talking about science in the same breath as yoga. And I can tell you, because I've taught about it in Asia, Australia, Europe, a lot of different places, and for some people it's quite an edge, because, you know, we can be we like to carve up the world into areas of certitude, right, or places where we feel really at home and familiar. And for some of us, perhaps we just want our yoga to be a place that's separate, and that's understandable. But it turns out science is defined by the empirical method, right? It's defined by experimentation and results, and the ability to do an experiment again and to look at data. But yoga in some ways is not that different than that. Yoga is a practice. It's a physical, when we're talking about hatha yoga and pranayama, a physical practice that we're doing. When we're talking about meditation, there's a physical practice. When we're talking about bhakti yoga, or the yoga of devotion, it's about doing something, right? Doing a practice. And as we mentioned earlier, a sustained practice over time is what creates changes through yoga. When you want to, and yoga is what's happening. One of my teachers, Anthony Benenati, anybody ever studied with him? Brilliant, brilliant teacher. Absolutely brilliant. Can teach you all kinds of crazy advanced poses, but also a brilliant philosopher also. He always says, yoga is what's happening between where you are and the pose you want to get to. So think of like the hardest yoga pose you can imagine doing. And the truth is that, as you all know, once you get to that pose, there's always a harder pose. You know, you finally master a handstand in the center of the room, and then, okay, now lift one hand up. Or, you know, there's always a harder pose. But the yoga is getting to that place, and then there's no place there when you get there, right? Because there's just always going to be, it's like the line on the horizon. But really, when I say, you know, the yoga isn't about putting your foot behind your head, I don't in any way mean to be pejorative about what it takes to do a physical practice, the determination, the tapas, the self-discipline. And I myself practice Ashtanga. I've finished the intermediate series of Ashtanga, so I actually do a very physically demanding practice. But the benefits of the practice, of course there's the physical benefits, but the psychological benefits, are the non-tangible benefits, so to speak, is the benefits of increased equanimity, the ability to stay steadfast, right? To show up. They're the benefits that really matter in your life off the yoga mat. So you don't, the question isn't like, when your yoga, how do you know your yoga practice is improving? Your relationships get better. Your relationship with yourself, your relationship with other people. You stop flipping everybody who passes you on the freeway off, right? Anybody else at their least yogic when you're driving? Dude. No, I know, yeah. My absolute least yogic. Yeah, but so the practice, the yoga being between you and the pose you want to get to, what we're really gesturing towards is those skills and capabilities that you need to cultivate to get to that place, right? That's where the real journey is, and the real juiciness. And of course it's a benefit to be able to get into Bakasana or forearm balance, or just think of any pose that you're working on. But the other stuff is so much more, over the long term, so much more valuable. Okay, So both science and yoga are pragmatic enterprises as well as being empirical methods, right? In other words, they're practical. So now, neuroscience, biochemistry, psychopharmacology, which is there on your handout. And I want to have you guys have at the ready the one that says handout number 1. This has a lot of technical jargon in it, which we'll look back and forth at as we get more into the juicy stuff here. And psychopharmacology it's on page 5 of that handout. I don't know if the numbers have been changed. A study of drug. Okay, so it's a study of drug-induced changes in mood, psychology, thinking, and behavior. And PNI, which is psychoneuroimmunology, the definition for that is right there underneath it, is the study of the interaction between psychological processes and the immune and nervous systems. Of particular interest is research into the effects of stress on our mental health and our ability to combat illness, and how yoga can offset the effects of stress. Okay, so this is sexy, right? PNI is a really hot area right now, and there's some references on your reading list to some articles about that, but you take one look at this and you think, okay, well, psychoneuroimmunology, clearly like Ayurveda is going to cover some of that terrain, or if you're somebody who's into the Chinese system, that's also relevant there, because these ancient systems had already recognized the interconnection of all of these areas, right? And the importance of yoga, let's limit ourselves to talking about Ayurveda, for addressing the person as a full spectrum, fully integrated being, which is why I love the title of Ashley's training, Yoga, Psyche, Soul. Really powerful title. Okay, so any questions or comments so far? Everything's pretty self-evident. Okay, good. So, yes?
Psychopharmacology, is it referred to prescription drugs?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. It does refer to prescription or to any drugs, but what's interesting, and what we're going to get to in a little while, is it turns out that your body also produces drugs. You know that. Okay. Well, not everybody does. And drugs that your body produces, anybody know what they're called? There's a name, yes, cortisol, hormones, but they're called endogenous drugs. And that's somewhere on this handout. And drugs that are produced outside the body are called exogenous. Endogenous, exogenous. So an endogenous one is cortisol or oxytocin or dopamine or serotonin, or the natural opioids, which are endorphins and enkephalin. And exogenous drugs would be heroin, cocaine. Anybody watching Narcos at the moment? Speaking of cocaine. It's so good. I know, we're nearly finished season 3. Okay, so we'll be coming back to this in a little while. And actually, it's a great question to ask at this juncture, because that's a unifying point. Science, samskara, self-mastery, one thing that that I see as unifying these 3 areas is the understanding yoga as this system for addressing the person as a multifaceted unit or being. But one of the things that Patanjali, for example, who's such a great psychologist, and I think that if Patanjali was alive at the moment, he'd be looking at neuroscience also, right? For the time he was alive, what he was writing about was super cutting edge, his insights. And we would say right now probably neuroscience is like the most cutting edge thing we have. But at that moment, they didn't have the knowledge of biochemistry and physiology that we do now. And this knowledge that we have about how our own systems are so susceptible of biochemical changes, and how those biochemical changes filter through the system, is really affecting our understanding of how yoga techniques work. And I'll talk more about this over the next little while. And just one thing, and a side note that I want to mention is that if it seems that some of what I'm talking about is circular, the reason being is that we're weaving a tantra here, and it's not exactly possible to be completely linear in the discussion. So pulling in, does that make sense? From referring back to our physical yoga practice, referring to Patanjali, back to the science, that we're not doing analytic philosophy. Let's put it that way, right? So we're doing something that's much more weaving a tantra. Yeah.
Are you finding that in neuroscience now? Because essentially a lot of what we are learning has been effective for thousands of years from a variety of Eastern cultures that was never codified in the scientific empirical system. Are you finding more and more interest among researchers in looking at specific things that work, specific medicines, specific practices, and like trying to go in now and figure out why exactly that's working and what is the biochemistry behind that, and is there a physiological response that we can measure? I guess what I'm saying is, like, are we almost backwards engineering now the neuroscience back into the
yeah.
Been working?
I think from my experience, and I'll mention some names, and all of these people are on the reading list. Authors like Norman Doidge, who's written these 2 books. Have you guys heard of him? He's an MD from, I think, Toronto. Brilliant. And he specializes in neuroscience, and he's written 2 books which run, don't walk to get these books. The first one is called The Brain That Changes Itself. It's about neuroplasticity. And the second one is The Brain's Way of Healing. Absolutely brilliant, brilliant books. I cannot recommend them highly enough. And in the first one, The Brain That Changes Itself, is a great primer on neuroscience and neuroplasticity for people. Does anybody in here have a degree in neuroscience? Again, you never know who your audience is, so one should never assume. And a couple of times it's happened to me that I've given a talk and later a doctor has come up to me and said, yeah, you did really well on the neuroscience. And I'm like, oh my God, thank God I didn't know there was a doctor in the room. Because I'm not a doctor of neuroscience. But so brilliant primer and introduction on neuroscience and neuroplasticity, and then The Brain's Way of Healing, like your ultimate geek guide. And he talks a lot about Parkinson's disease in that. There's a very long chapter on that. And he does talk about yoga there quite a bit. But there isn't always a one-one correlation, in that I haven't found that, particular scientists are saying, and when you do a Surya Namaskar, A, blah, blah, blah happens. But I think there's a general movement towards the acceptance of these modalities as having like efficacy for health and well-being. Particularly with relation to stress and trauma. And then I know with meditation, there are more studies done on the meditation and the brain waves and that kind of stuff. And I know Ashley's going to talk to you guys in quite some detail about that. There is Herbert Benson, of course, who wrote that famous book, The Relaxation Response. Have you guys heard of that? Yeah, so he talks a lot. He's into TM, Transcendental Meditation, but he talks a lot about the different studies and stuff like that. Also, and Dave, I know, will talk to you guys about this. There's an author named Andrew Newberg. I don't have the reading list in front of me, but it's Why God Won't Go Away. Yeah, and he's written another book called How God Changes Your Brain. And this guy is also a professor of neuroscience at a university on the East Coast, and he references quite a bunch of studies as well, but it's more about the meditation and chanting. And I think it's very important for us to be able to use these studies and to bring in science. And I think it's important to be able to not just use anecdotal evidence when talking about the benefits of yoga, and at the same time, for those of us who've been practicing yoga over the long term and seen the changes that it's created in our lives and the lives, hopefully, of people in our immediate, you know, like for me, I will definitely say it's made my marriage better. It's made my relationship with my family better, right? We also know we don't need to prove to anybody how yoga has changed our lives. So there's that also, right? Okay. Any other points or comments at the moment?
I think there are more studies are being done, particularly on breath and specific breathing practices. Mm-hmm. And I haven't heard this, but I think that it's a little easier to do a proper scientific study and measure meditation and breathing versus asana.
Right.
It's challenging to, you know, put someone up and then people do it with different intensity, you know, all those kind of things. So anyway, but I know there's a lot more studies being done with breath in particular.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I meant to say Rick Hansen, who wrote that book, Buddha's Brain, right? He has a great PDF available which you can download, and you can just Google and find it's on his website about the parasympathetic nervous system, and it's really accessible and important. And he does talk about different pranayams, breathing techniques. Yeah, I think it's a great point. Pardon? Rick Hansen. Dr. Rick Hansen. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so coming back to samskaras. So samskaras, we can agree, are neural pathways which are stored in the, you might say, the mental body, right, or the mind body, and they get activated. So for example, they're habitual responses, and every time you do that thing which is a habitual response, you reactivate the samskara. It strengthens the samskara. Have you guys heard the phrase neurons that wire together fire together? Yeah. And neurons that wire apart fire apart. There's a phrase for this, you don't have to remember, it's on your handout. Long-term potentiation is the term for the strengthening of neuronal connections, and long-term depression is the phrase for the weakening of those, right? One thing that's super cool about the brain's inherent neuroplasticity is that we can harness that ability, which is the brain's ability to change itself in response to experience. And we can harness that, if you like, meta faculty or ability of the brain to strengthen neuronal connections between. It's not like we can look inside there and see the neurons, right? But basically we want to strengthen particular habitual ways of being and weaken other ones. And just to circle back to Yoga Nidra for a minute, Yoga Nidra is, and using Sankalpa or intention, is a very powerful way to do that. It's a little bit beyond the scope of what we have time for today to get into that in any depth, but side note. Okay, well, actually, before I move on to talking more about the biochemistry, I want to introduce you guys to a sutra here. Hayam Dukam Anagatam. Have you heard of that? Don't worry if you haven't, it's on the handout, which is called handout number 2. It's from Patanjali Sutra 216. Are you smiling because you know it?
No, I was smiling because I like what you're saying.
Oh, so Hayam Dukam Anagatam. And it translates as the avoidance of the suffering that's yet to come. Yeah. And Patanjali says that the job of the yogin, the yogi, is to cultivate practices that lead to Hayam Dukam Anagatam. Right? So it's our job to set ourselves up for this practice. And how do we do that? Not to sound trite, but obviously svadhyaya is very important, right? Self-study. Unless you get really honest with yourself about your habitual responses and modes of being, there's no way for you to have any clarity about the suffering that they cause. And of course, and please don't feel like I don't want this to sound really negative. This is just a fact of our human beingness, right? It applies to everybody. It's a formal condition of being human. In other words, it comes with the territory, right? So how else, we got to practice self-study. Meditation is really important for that. We got to create clarity so that we can see that. Compassion is also really important, right? And self-love, because as you all are aware, that without holding a container for ourselves when we do our sadhana, our spiritual practice, and our yoga practice in any way, whether it's getting on the mat and doing a physical practice, doing our pranayama, meditating, unless we hold that container for ourselves, it's very hard to stay with it. It's hard enough to go through your stuff. Adding to the epicycle of when you see, like my Anna Forrest, do you guys know who she is? Yeah, so she was one of my real root teachers, and she was the person I took my first 2 teacher trainings with, and I worked with her very closely for a long time. And she tends to attract students who've had a lot of trauma in their lives, which I have had. And she attracts people who've a lot of sexual trauma, which I have not had, physical trauma, eating disorders, and so that tends to be kind of an unspoken paradigm, or in fact often is spoken. But one thing that she's really great about doing is talking about the importance of stopping the cycle of self-castigation that we all go through. So it's that thing about whether, you know, you ate the extra slice of chocolate cake, and or you gained back the 5 pounds that you lost, or you indulged in that, you cut yourself again, or you went out and did a sexually addictive behavior again, or you did that thing with your child. I mean, that behavior, like you said that thing, or whatever, that thing that you've said that you're not going to do anymore, that you've recognized as causing suffering in your life. And, you know, it happens. And for many of it, the really crucial stopping point there is to hold ourselves in a place of love and compassion, to break the epicycle of the downward spiral. And that was one thing I always remember Anna talking about so compassionately, is how can you use your yoga practice to hold you in those times so that you don't keep going. I have a family member who struggles with very severe alcoholism, and what keeps happening is that she locks herself in her home and drinks liters of vodka for a whole weekend. Yeah. And then usually a call is made to someone who calls the police or something like that. And what the family, we've all come to understand, it's that epicycle. It's that once you start, oh, well, I fucked up so badly now, sorry. I might as well keep going, you know. It's having the tools and the skills to be able to short circuit that downward spiral, the negativity spiral. So back to Heyam, Dukam, and Agatam, how can we use our yoga practices to short circuit this? Consistency, yeah, exactly, and sustained practice over time, and the ability to get on the mat again when it's been 10 days, or, yeah.
Well, what's so interesting too is what you're saying, connecting it back to, what do you call it, depression of the pathways, of the neuron pathways?
Well, just breaking the circuitry, but yeah.
Those samskaras have built so strongly over so much time that of course it's going to take a tremendous amount of time and practice.
Absolutely.
For that depression happen and rebuild or reconnect wires in different ways.
Exactly.
And so that self-compassion and awareness becomes that much more important when you understand the neuroscience behind it, because you just actually can't do it right away.
Right. Yeah, that's a really great point, and it circles back to, you know, I'm realizing that I should have you all say your names when you make a point, because I apart from Dom and Jessica, I don't know your names. So, what's your name?
I'm Casey.
Casey. And what's your name? Lisa. When Lisa, you know, asked the question about psychopharmacology, is just the study of external drugs. Well, it turns out that the drugs that the body makes are just, so endogenous drugs are just as addictive as cocaine, as any exogenous drug, right? Yeah, we want to generate addiction to drugs that make us feel good, right? although no one can live the whole time like in oxytocin. Imagine like, how you, I mean, imagine like if you were in the bliss, post-orgasmic bliss the whole time. You wouldn't be able to get into your car and drive, right? I mean, you wouldn't be able to get on the freeway. It's so while it's beautiful, right, we can't live there the whole time, but of course, we want to break cycles of addiction to cortisol, to stress hormones. And as we get a little bit more into the center of the Tantra we're weaving, we're going to actually even talk about how those hormones get diffused throughout the body. But so, Casey, that's a great point about when to short circuit neuronal firing, the wiring together of mental grooves. It takes a lot of time, a lot of practice. It also takes a meta intention. Do you guys know what the word meta means? Yeah, so an attention that's overriding, that we're committed to as a first principle, if you like. But what's so powerful about the science now, and as you were saying, Casey, it's almost like kind of like reverse engineering, looking at how the practices work, is knowing that samskaras, or neural pathways, have a biochemical signature is really important. And this biochemical signature that they have affects how we feel. And it's not just like affecting mood, but it's affecting our whole physiology from the most, the particles, biochemical particles, all the way up to how we do talk about, how I'm feeling in this moment. Does that make sense? So knowing that samskaras, thoughts, have a biochemical substrate or part to them is very empowering, because it means we get to know, okay, so this isn't just like, oh, I'm being a bitch if a certain behavior shows up, but this is actually, there's a whole physiological mechanism at work here. And then the work, or the sadhana for us, the practice, the Patanjalian practice for us to be able to do Heyam Dukam Anagatam, or to put that into places. So what steps do I have to take to change the physiology? There's a lot in that, and we'll dig a little bit deeper, but I just want to does that resonate for everybody?
It's not entirely clear. Can you make an example?
Well, I'm going to give an example from my own life, and this isn't, like, I'm hypoglycemic. Anybody else in here? Yeah. So I can tell you, and you could ask Dave about it next week, and he'll be very happy to tell you. At a certain point, I completely melt down after a certain point of no food. And it's almost like reverting, I have a better handle on it now, and my parents used to always say, get something into her mouth quickly, just get some food. And, for the first few years that I was with Dave, who's total opposite. Do you guys know about Vata Pitta Kapha? Yeah. Right. Most kaphas aren't hypoglycemic. He's a fair whack at kapha, and he wouldn't mind me telling you this. You can ask him, I promise you he wouldn't. So for somebody like that, to get what hypoglycemia is just really an abstract thing. So he would think, she's just being a bitch. Get a handle on yourself. And I had to really reverse engineer myself, so to speak, and at a certain point be like, you know what, Dearbh, you have to take responsibility for this. Because you have to take responsibility for having snacks, almonds in your bag or something, so that when you get to that point, it just doesn't become all-out murder. Because it frequently does. And because at a certain point, if you're hypoglycemic, the choice it's not really a matter of choice. It's very, very difficult to contain that meltdown. And what I've understood is it's that thing, it's a physiological, your whole system is out of whack. So the Hayam Dukam part is like, well, okay, I know this about myself. It sounds really glamorous to be, oh, well, you know, I'll just have a green juice for breakfast and a cappuccino, you know, and then I'll have a soup for lunch or whatever. No, not if your meltdown is going to really create a lot of suffering for you and a lot of other people. It's irresponsible. So I've had to learn that it's actually part of my yoga. No, I mean, it's funny, but at the same time, I've actually had to learn that it's part of my yoga practice to take responsibility for that. So that our yoga practice and our self-care can actually be things that are really practical and mundane, that we wouldn't necessarily think as being part of yoga, but taking responsibility for our own physiology is a huge part of that.
Certainly part of self-mastery.
Exactly. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and what's your name?
Astrid.
Hi, Astrid.
Hi. I understand that it takes time and consistency to switch these patterns. I just wonder, when you backstep or, you know, alcoholism, you fall off the wagon, how far off do you get? Are you starting back over?
You know, I can't speak to that because I'm fortunately not alcoholic, and
Not even just any, you know, some scars that you're trying to, you know, clear, and you get on a rigor and you get disciplined, and then you back fall, so to speak.
Wow, I mean, good.
Step one, or
Yeah. So if I heard the theory that it takes 90 days for a new habit to develop, but it takes a year for it to stick. And a lot of people don't know that it takes a year for it to completely stick. So let's say you're 10 months in and then you revert back. Are you starting back on day one?
Well, I think that's a kind of a complex question, and I'm not sure that I'm 100% qualified to talk about it, but what I do know is that the more, if you say like prophylactic work you've done or preparation, the more time you've spent doing any practice, the more you are at home in it, right? Yeah. The more time that you've spent really generating your sankalpa, your intention, and if you like somatizing your intention through your meditation practice, through your yoga nidra practice, through your asana practice, when you create an intention, and no, it could be any intention, you can put that before you on your yoga mat. Make it, you know, at the start of your practice, you can symbolically put the intention there, and then you offer your yoga practice to giving Shakti to your Sankalpa or your intention. So when you've done all that work, or when we have done all that work prior, it's easier to get back on track because we've fortified those parts of ourselves that are, if you like, holding up the intention. Also, the important thing is that when we're creating new samskaras, if you will, or new modes of being, the more, remember that the more that you activate neural pathways and the more that this biochemical signature is activated, the stronger it is. So the easier it is to get back to it.
The signal is stronger.
The signal, the actual, I know you want to make a point, the physiological signal is actually stronger. And one thing I want to add, which we'll talk about more also, is that knowing how to get back into the parasympathetic mode is really important. Knowing how to get our systems from stress and arousal, sympathetic, into parasympathetic is really important. And one thing that I've discovered about that is pleasure is really important for that. Finding something that makes you feel good as soon as possible. And of course, we don't mean like, you know, eating the whole packet of chocolate biscuits or drinking the whole 6-pack, but really like pleasure in a way that nourishes you, whether it's oils. I know you're really into oils, Ashley, or self-massage, or a bath, or body work, or music that you love, or beautiful flowers. Something that gets you at home in your physical body as well, and gets you into that pleasure state is going to be helpful. Does that make sense? Okay, and then what's your name with the blue shirt? I know you wanted to make a point.
Oh, well, my name is Peg.
Peg?
Yeah. I was just thinking about what you're saying. I think, so it seems to me like what you're saying is that we can create new pathways in our minds. So it's kind of like the question is, so what happens to the other pathway? But so one is going to sort of, the less you go there, the weaker it gets. The more you go here, the stronger it gets. The longer you do that, obviously. So, I mean, the question would be, I guess, does the other one ever really go away? And yeah, like, will it just not be there? Or not, so you won't be as reactive, but I think the answer, you kind of said it, is that, first of all, I guess everyone's probably different. I don't think that's something you can say. How long will it take? You know, just what I think I hear you saying is that the science is there to prove that that process is possible.
Well, yeah, and it's also, remember that one of the traditional definitions of samskara that you'll hear, and this is in there in your handout, is that they're latent tendencies. We're not always operating all the time out of our habitual reactions, right? They're in response to particular event. Reaction is cause-effect, right? That's what a reaction is. So often they're latent, but it's like that, you know, if you don't go near a particular memory, you won't keep bringing it up, right? But the more that you bring up, and a memory is also, neuroscientists talk about memory as a stored pattern of links between neuronal cells, brain cells. So you know this, and because of the negativity bias, does everybody know what the negativity bias in the brain is? Yes, Dan.
For safety and survival?
Well, right. It turns out that adaptively, in other words, for our species to survive, we have what's called a negativity bias. We pay more attention to the negative because that was the thing that, you know, our forebearers on the savannah, the tiger could eat you, or the fire could burn you alive. So you remembered things, the snake, the rat, things like that. And so those potential threats get hardwired into the architecture of our brain, and they're always much more prevalent because historically or ancestrally, exactly, it's adaptive for us to have a negativity bias. However, it turns out that the part of the brain that stores emotional memories, which is the amygdala, there's a lot of info in your handout on this, which is part of the limbic system or the emotional brain. The amygdala tends to get overreactive, and it also monitors, it's also dealing with emotional information, or information that, I didn't actually say that correctly, information which can be perceived as threatening to our emotions, right? So we have a negativity bias with respect to things that we imagine can also threaten our, if you like, our psychic well-being, our emotional well-being. It's not just like the car speeding down the street, it's the sarcastic comment, it's the being in a situation that you were in before that was particularly painful. Can we shelve that for a couple of minutes and come back to it? But yes.
Oh, that's the addiction part of that, right? The fact that it's for safety, it's subconscious for safety. You're memorizing that in your nervous system. But would that be considered like an addiction at that point? Because a lot of addiction is subconscious.
Well, yeah, you're kind of getting I want to speak to what you're saying, but I'm not quite ready. There's a few more things I want to get out there on the table, but yes, you're gesturing in exactly but the addiction, it turns out, which is what I think is so powerful about the biochemistry, the neurophysiology component, it turns out that the addiction is actually to endogenous drugs, to chemicals. It's physiological. It's not just like I'm mentally addicted to something. It turns out that there is a biochemical substrate. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Peg, were you happy with? Okay. So in having these discussions, one metaphor I like to use is talking about our understanding of ourselves, our access to ourselves as being like an iceberg. So think about an iceberg. They say 7/8 of it is below the water, and you can just see the top 1/8 of it. Well, for ourselves, right? Have you guys heard the word phenomenological? Yeah, it's one of those big philosophy words. Your phenomenological experience is, actually, let's do a quick experiment. Close your eyes, just wherever you are. You're not meditating, just, and now think of biting into a lemon. Just imagine in your visceral sense that you're biting into a lemon. Okay, open your eyes. Did everybody get that thing on the side of your tongue? Okay, so that's the phenomenological memory of what it is to bite into a lemon. So your phenomenology has to do with all that stuff that's available to us kind of swirling around in here, right? All our subjective stuff. Vrittis is part of it. You know the Sanskrit word vritti? But it's not just vrittis. So you could say like that our phenomenological experience of all the stuff, like just the theater of emotions and memories and feelings and all that stuff is like the top layer of the iceberg. But below the iceberg, it gets more and more subtle, right? There's all the stuff like we're not really, I mean, maybe if you did a Vipassana sit for 10 days, you might start to have more, I don't know, Ashley, you've done Vipassana sits, right? Did you start to feel that you were able to feel like the workings of your body in a different way?
Yeah, I think for me the biggest thing was I felt like I truly went beyond thought and was like kind of living in a space beyond linear thinking. Nice. Yeah. It's the seventh sense of no separation, according to Richard Miller. Yeah, but so we don't necessarily have access to what's happening in our bodies and in our minds and our system, right? And we certainly have no access to like the workings, the cellular workings of our bodies, right? But we trust that it's all happening in there. It's like all the stuff that's happening below the level of the iceberg. Does that make sense? Okay. So, samskaras, latent mental tendencies, are mental grooves which have biochemical substrates. So we have kind of a deeper understanding of how it can be that we could get addicted to particular behaviors of ways of being. I want to circle back before we get more into the nitty-gritty of the science of it. I just want to motivate the Patanjali a little bit more for you to see how you can tie in Patanjali into all this stuff. This is on your website, on your handout. He talks about a cycle called karma chakra or vritti samskara chakra. And this is from The Secret of the Yoga Sutras. And this is described as our past karmic impressions influence our present actions. If not checked in time, our actions lead to the formation of deep karmic impressions, which then impel us to perform similar actions. It's all the stuff we've been talking about. This vicious cycle veils the innate luminosity of our mind and makes it a slave to its acquired conditions. Right? And the teaching says there's 3 distinct components to this cycle of vritti samskara chakra. The thought or vritti that propels the action. The impression or samskara that's created by that thought and the ensuing action. So in other words, the habitual reaction or response. Well, your handout has been paginated differently than what I have, so I'm not sure. Got it? Sure. And then chakra is the next round or chakra of action propelled by the samskara. So it's like that, it's like the hamster in the wheel, right? It's that cycle that you can't quite break out of. And we all, I'm sure, have numerous ones of those in our lives, right? You know, like the definition of madness is doing the same thing and never expecting a different result and never getting it, right?
That's like a popularization of this teaching, Vritti Samskara Chakra. So yoga is, and this is also on your sheet, using the inherent brilliance and power of the mind to change the course of our karmic impression is our birthright. The method that allows this birthright is yoga. Okay, so without using the language of plasticity here or neuroplasticity, this is also now we're kind of reverse engineering back with our current understandings of what's possible back into how we can actually use the mind, which is, can we agree this is not an uncontroversial subject among philosophers? I'm not sure among psychologists, but that mind and brain are different. We kind of all talk as if they are. Among philosophers, that's not self-evident. There's a lot of disagreement. A lot of philosophers say that brain is mind. I'm not sure about among psychologists, but no. Okay. So what I'm going to invite us to agree on, or invite your agreement on, is, can we say that mind is what brain does? Does everybody feel comfortable with that? Yeah, it fits better into our yogic paradigm, but I just wanted to let you know that that's not uncontroversial. But so plasticity is then the brain, the mind arising from brain, using the innate faculties of itself, its reflexive capabilities, to change the brain and therefore change the mind. Now look at that quote. This is super traditional. This is from Patanjali. Using the inherent brilliance and power of the mind to change the course of our karmic impression. A karmic impression is a mental groove, a samskara. We know, he's not talking about biochemical substrates, right? But we know that they have these biochemical substrates which then change how our physiology works, which is all part of this cascade effect of the habitual action, the samskara, the cycles, right? So it's kind of genius in a way when you think about what we're now able to apply to these teachings and see just how powerful they are, and actually how brilliant the yogis were, and these practices, how empirical these practices actually are. The practices that got codified in yoga and that have been handed down to us have been handed down. You know, when people talk about like the ancient practice of yoga, like obviously they weren't talking about a killer playlist and, you know, the sickest, sweatiest flow you can imagine, right? They're really talking practices like that are talked about in the Shiva Samhita, the Hatha Yoga Pradikapa. These texts are meditation practices. They're kriyas, they're pranayams, and they were codified and handed down to us just because they work, because of their empirical value, which kind of leads us back to the science thing, right? These are really empirical methods that we're talking about. They're not just esoteric teachings. Although, of course, what's beautiful about yoga is that it's this panoply of teachings and philosophies that are all guiding us home, ultimately to ourselves. So, okay. Any questions or comments so far? So let me just take stock for a second because I've been talking a lot. So this cycle, Vritti Samskara Chakra, the cycle of samskaras and neural pathways, neurons that wire together, firing together. So the means by which neurons communicate with each other is electrochemical. When one neuron wants to talk to another, it sends a message from the soma, the body of the cell. It sends an electrical pulse down what's called the, and on your, you can look at it now, or you could look at it later. On the diagram that's part of your handout, there's a picture of a cell that has, it's kind of like an octopus or something, you know, it has these arms sticking out. And it sends an electrical charge down the axon, which is one of the arms sticking out from the body of the cell. They're very long. They can go for several feet in your body. And when this electrical pulse or charge reaches the end of the axon, it reaches what's called the synaptic cleft, or the synapse. And then, so the cleft is the space between neurons, right? Tiny, tiny, tinier than we can imagine. But it turns out there is a space there. And to cross that synapse or synaptic cleft, the electrical charge can't go across, so it releases a chemical. It's like a little ejaculation. And the chemical it's a neurotransmitter, a neuropeptide like oxytocin or cortisol. Actually, ACH is a better one to talk about, and that's somewhere on, don't worry about it, it's on your handout. And this little chemical swims across, or like gets ejaculated across the synapse and binds to the receptor cell on the other side. And then the electrical charge goes up the dendrite, it's called, of the neuron on the other side. And that's how all, so that's actually, there is actually a physiological wiring. Now, interesting factoid, there are 100 billion neurons in your brain. The brain is it's so much more complicated than the Milky Way or the galaxy. It leaves those, as my granny would have said, in the halfpenny place, right? Yeah, 100 billion neurons. And each neuron has, I believe, 10,000 places of connection with other neurons. Yeah, it's mind-boggling. If every neuronal connection in your brain lit up, it would fry not just your brain, but our entire solar system. The complexity, it's mathematically not even possible to account for the complexity. Isn't that far out? Yeah, right. And it's, you know, like those teachings of, like the yogis say, the moon and the stars and the sun are all inside you, everything. And I remember I used to be like, yeah, whatever. But when you actually think about the complexity of what is inside you, it becomes the metaphor has much more resonance and meaning, right? And, wait, there was one other thing I wanted to say there. Right. If you're particularly interested in geeking out on that kind of stuff, one of the books on your list I particularly recommend, it's called Incognito, I believe, by David Eagleman. Would somebody mind? I believe it is. Yeah, is it Incognito? Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant book and really great for talking about this kind of stuff. Super accessible.
So that's about the actual chemistry between synapses and...
He talks about that a little bit, but just for the whole like far outness of what's actually in your brain, that's a really great book. Yeah. So yeah, I would strongly recommend you reading it. Yeah.
Can you use all of this Brazilian?
I don't know. I don't know. But it's yeah. But it's okay. So the biochemicals that we're talking about, these substrates of samskaras, our neural pathways, have names like oxytocin, which we've already talked about, and enkephalins. And these are particularly important or good ones to know about because they make us feel good. You've probably all heard of the oxytocin effect, which is bonding, increased intimacy and trust, all good stuff, right? Oxytocin is like the post-orgasm bliss molecule. And so, you know, you guys say dopamine, right? I say dopamine. Yeah, dopamine is arousal. It's associated with addictive behaviors, but also the reward mechanism in the brain and foreplay. So you could think like foreplay is dopamine, post-orgasm, oxytocin, trust and bonding. But oxytocin and, endorphins and enkephalins are really important to know about because it turns out that pranayama can cause their release from the brain. And there's a part of the brain called the periaqueductal gray. Do you know about this? You're nodding your head. Yeah. 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 The periaqueductal gray is associated with pain perception and management. That's also on your sheet. jargon. And it turns out that breathing techniques particularly affect the periaqueductal gray and affect the periaqueductal PAG, let's call it, ability to release these endogenous opioids, feel-good drugs that the body makes, and which is women. Who here is a mom? Okay, giving birth. So you all know better than I do about the breathing exercises that you can do during delivery, right? She's like, they don't work. Give me the but and pranayamas, kumbhaka, which is retention of the breath, and kapalabhati, which you guys all know that, right? The short, sharp exhales. They're particularly beneficial for stimulating the PAG to release these endogenous pain-killing and feel-good molecules. That's really an empowering thing to know as a practitioner, as a yoga teacher, as somebody who's concerned with your own domain, sovereignty of your domain, equanimity, self-mastery, flourishing, right? And also that coming back into parasympathetic response. These drugs bring us into the parasympathetic quiescence, relax and restore, which is also what you experience in meditation, right? A particularly juicy meditation drops you into that place. Shavasana drops you into that place.